Hello and welcome back to the AI Ethics Now podcast. My name is Tom Ritchie and I'm really pleased today to be joined by Ed Crook, VP of Strategy and Operations at DeepL, the global AI translation platform recently valued at $2 billion. Ed's here today to discuss this expansion, the ethics of agentic AI, and how companies can ensure responsible AI adoption whilst navigating regulatory frameworks like the EU AI Act. Ed, hello.
Hi, Tom. Good to be here.
How you doing? Everything going okay?
Going well, thank you. Yeah, thanks for asking.
Good, good, good. Let's get straight into it then, Ed. What brings you to this conversation on AI ethics, please?
Yeah, good question. So I've been working in AI and AI companies for quite a while. I guess my journey with this started really back in the days of NLP or natural language processing. This was in the early days of IBM Watson, certainly before ChatGPT. Um, Studied linguistics originally. So what drew me into AI ethics really was the problem of trying to work with large bodies, large corpora of language and text data, and use them to help solve real world problems. Now, language data is messy, and so you need technology really to help you do that at scale. And NLP or natural language processing was kind of the way to kind of get that done. It started with statistical methods, with kind of probability theory, and then from there into neural networks, and then eventually into LLMs or large language models. And that's really when I first got into the ethics question, which kind of raised itself in front of me. I was working at the time at a company called Brandwatch with a really great team in New York, including people like Paul Siegel, who was coming to us from the math department at Columbia. And what we noticed in NLP was that bias was coming through in some of the sentiment classification of text data because bias was in the training data. And so it started this really useful and kind of fruitful conversation around how we actually make sure that we build systems that are responsible in their build and application. Yeah, language is a natural starting point for AI, and language is still at the center of how people work. So language is a natural kind of starting point. And what we really want to do is to ultimately help people work with and also beyond language and make that work simpler, smarter, more connected. At DeepL today, I'm also responsible for a range of things, including our ESG program, so environmental, social, and governance initiatives. And this basically means that we are doing well by doing good, right? So this includes everything from our carbon emissions as a tech company through to information security and our NGO program as well. So that's one of the key responsibilities that I work on at DeepL.
Thanks so much. That's really useful to hear and great to hear about your journey as well from linguistics into this space. The first question I've got, Ed, is that DeepL has shifted from specialized translation to launching an autonomous AI agent. What prompted this strategic shift?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. DeepL in the past was most well known for AI translation, for machine translation. The company was founded in 2017, and in the last 8 years, we've definitely proven ourselves in that space. So moving into Agentic, then this is definitely a big step forward, but it's also, a very natural step, actually. The driving force behind this, and I should say behind basically any innovation we do, is our customers, right? They're already using us and relying on DeepL. Over 200,000 businesses are relying on DeepL to do kind of day-to-day translation work and language work. And what they're saying to us very clearly is, hey, translation is part of our workflow, but it's a small part. And actually, there are tasks and jobs to be done on either side. And we want you to help us make our lives easier and help us get this work done in a more scalable way. And so agentic AI is the natural next step or the next evolution of our product and product offering. I would say on top of that, DeepL, in my view, is uniquely positioned to be able to solve that problem. There's a lot of hype around agentic right now, as you know, but when we look at what DeepL has, we've got, I think, proven credentials to build really useful AI. So, practical, useful AI solving real world problems. We've got the infrastructure in place as well and have invested really heavily in R&D. I'm very lucky to work with some really smart people inside the company. So we've got all of the kind of know-how to be able to build this as well. And we've got the trust, right? We're built on really the foundation of trust. And that's how we've built out our roster of customers today. All of those ingredients are really critical, actually, when you're building out an agentic offering.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder, what does this say about broader trends in AI company evolution?
Yeah, I think so. AI has definitely evolved from a space of how can we, automate specific tasks, how can we generate content with Gen AI, and now into a space where how can we actually get work done. And I think what it's coming from is really an appetite from individual users, but also an appetite from businesses to really help them to scale and grow. When we speak with our customers, when we speak with businesses out there, what we find actually is, even in the largest enterprise in the world, you've still got human beings who are still on the clock, right? Who are still trying to get work done. And oftentimes, their to-do list is longer than they have hours in the day. And people generally will try and lean in towards those products and services that will help make their lives easier. Right? That's really what the promise of AI is in this context. I think that the early applications were very much in the realm of efficiency, automation and efficiency, and that's still a very big part of the ROI story for many companies out there. But it really goes beyond that. And I think where we're seeing some really interesting innovation and how people use this is going beyond efficiency and also trying to invent completely new workflows, right? What becomes possible with technology that wasn't even imaginable a couple of years ago.
That ability to save time is true as much in education as it is in the business world as well. You've previously described that DeepL agents have human in the loop oversight. How does that actually work in practice?
Yeah, human in the loop is super, super important. I was listening, so you had on here JD Hansen, right, from Banta. And I think what she said was really spot on, which is, the security job is never done, and it's actually about keeping pace. I believe that fully. I totally agree with this. In order to keep pace, we know that the user needs to be free to choose the level of control that they need, and that level of control will vary depending on the task they're trying to do. It's proportionate, right? And in order to be able to do that, we've basically built the DeepL agent with that freedom in mind. So I'm happy to say, we've tested out the DeepL agent already with a thousand early testers before we launched the product. I'm a very happy one of those 1,000 users, and I can speak kind of firsthand to my experience of the product. And what I find is really that the DeepL agent is slightly different from some other agents out there that are being launched, and this is because it really navigates via a secondary browser interface. So in other words, it's navigating your machine, navigating a browser, navigating your systems in the same way that you would as a human user in a secondary space. Now, as the user, you can dip in and view that in real time anytime you like. You can see it navigating, see it working through. You can pause, you can raise your hand and take or relinquish control at kind of any time. And if the agent's unsure, it will ask and check in with you. With AI systems, normally I really urge against us anthropomorphizing AI. It's normally a trap. But here, actually, it's kind of a helpful comparison. The way that I think about agents, specifically in AI agents, is how would you like to ideally work with? Imagine if you had a new assistant, or imagine if you had a new intern joining the company. How would you like to work with them and delegate work to them? And what would be signals of trust of working with that new colleague? Now, if that new colleague took a task, ran into a dark room at the back of the office and locked the door, and came out again at 5 p.m., you might think twice about whether you'd be able to trust the quality of their work, right? If they had a problem with a task, you would hope and expect that they would come to you to seek guidance, right? These are all signals of trust, right? That's really important. Those same rules apply here. And the agent is built with that in mind, right? To make sure that the user can be in the driver's seat as much as they want. They can let go of control when they need. They can take it back when they need. And it's flexible in that regard.
And I wonder, where do you draw the line then between what the agent can do autonomously versus what requires human approval?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it varies. What I will say is there's been a huge trend in some of the usage from some of those first user tests to what we're starting to see now. So at the beginning, we see that users generally go in, and because this is a horizontal product, it can be used to do 1,000 things. The people experiment, right? They want to play around and see. And so you see a lot of people trying to kind of test out very kind of mundane or very kind of inventive use cases. And then over time, we see that people kind of have early wins. They start to then schedule repeat tasks, and then some of these can be automated more fully. So we see that kind of trust builds over time. People relinquish more control as they get more comfortable with the product. I think that's normal. Because the DeepL agent runs in a browser interface, in early testing, we also took control every now and again to show it how to navigate novel UIs, right? That's part of it. And it can learn through that process, which I think is pretty important. For me, the most important piece where the most important stage where the user will still request and regain control, and where I as a user still request and regain control, is for login and access approval, SSO, etc. There are certain systems where I wouldn't want any system to go and automatically act on my behalf or access sensitive systems on my behalf. I actively want to create a gate check where I'm approving login access, right, and sensitive systems. And in these cases, I can choose to do that, and I can choose to make it pause and ask.
And I think as well, you mentioned about you being one of the 1,000 people who did some beta testing with the Agentic AI. And my understanding is that there were 20,000 completed tasks. So what did you learn about when AI agents need human intervention or not?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it really depends on the job you're trying to do. I've tested it out with a bunch of different tasks for my own kind of workflows. So if the agent is going into an internal system where I know there's sensitive data, maybe I want to kind of check. But also, as a user, what I'm doing is I'm prescribing the level of control I want in a task. So, for example, I might, ask the agent to translate a bunch of documents for our internal teams into the local languages, and then email them out to leaders of those teams with instructions on what to do next. Before I go and spam everyone in the company and make myself very unpopular, what I might do is ask the agent to check with me, make sure I'm comfortable with the email copy. I improve it, maybe I make some edits, maybe I'm entirely happy with it, I have no notes, and I just give a thumbs up, and then it can go forward and progress to the next stage. But in this case, in this example, it could run that without my approval, that's totally fine. But I, as the user, have the freedom to choose when I want to set those gateposts.
And were there any surprising failure points that came up in these tasks?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, with any new product, yes, obviously, there's always a bit of a learning, and this is part of being an early tester. I think I mentioned earlier that normally I urge people against anthropomorphizing AI. I think this is a good example, right? So, in some ways, with early testing, we found that similar with any AI system, it can do some very, very advanced tasks almost instantly and flawlessly. And then it can fail at very, very basic tasks as well, right? And user interface systems is a good example of this. The DeepL agent navigates via a user's browser interface. And so there could be something really, simple in a website that it just couldn't understand spatially. The good news is that it can monitor users when they take control of the system and then learn, monitor, observe, and learn. And so those kind of wrinkles were ironed out very quickly. Overall, I would say that actually the amount of times that I need to kind of go in and correct is fairly low. The success rate is fairly high. And the good news is that the more it learns and observes, the success rate gets higher and higher.
And I think that's really interesting to hear about how that testing process has developed and how actually that will increase people's trust in the agent at the same time. And I know as well in your work, you collaborate with a lot of heavily regulated industries like banking and law. How do you balance this need for AI autonomy with compliance requirements that come from them?
Yeah, very good question. So DeepL, you're right, works with a bunch of leading companies in highly regulated industries. So this applies to financial services and pharmaceuticals and so on. If we take legal professionals as an example, because we ran a survey on legal professionals this year, over half of them are already saying that AI lets them spend more time on those what they call high judgment tasks, those strategic tasks, frees them up to your earlier point. And two-thirds are already exploring agentic AI, which is great, right? They're early adopters. They're doing it because their time is stretched and because this is going to be helpful for them. We see similar trends in other industries too, other high compliance industries. For me, most humans are mostly predictable most of the time. So human behavior is kind of like water flowing downhill, right? It'll take whatever is the fastest path. And in this case, AI tools offer a faster path. This can, as you know, result in shadow AI. And shadow AI in this case, referring to really just employees in companies maybe using AI systems in their work from tools that are not officially approved by the company. And I was trying to kind of talk this through with a friend of mine the other day, actually. And the analogy that brought it to life for me was if you think about something like the music industry in the noughties, and the first time that users were able to kind of share music files online for the first time, that was considered piracy, right? And Apple iTunes was built to combat the threat of piracy. But when we zoom out and look back, actually, the real winners of that time were companies like Spotify, who weren't there to combat piracy. They weren't there to kind of treat those people as villains, but instead they were acknowledged that they were music fans. They were music fans using tech to kind of meet a need, and they built a service that met that need, right? And in the same way, I would urge people against vilifying teams who are experimenting with AI systems. They're doing that today because they want to be more productive, and that's a good thing. That's fundamentally good. But it only works if the right security is in place. That's why we've built DeepL on trust, right? I mentioned this earlier. That's why information security is really important to us. And for legal professionals, for high compliance companies using DeepL, that means ISO 27001, that means SOC 2 Type 2, and. Working with and carefully choosing your partners is really important, especially in a business context where the consequences can be high, the stakes are high.
And you've mentioned the relationships that you built with those organizations. What were the clients' perhaps biggest concerns about using agentic AI?
I think for most people, they don't know what they don't know. So I think a lot of people want to see examples of others in the industry, examples, case studies, etc., of this in action. We had last month our annual conference, our Dialogues conference here in Berlin, which was great because it allowed us to connect our customers with one another so they could learn from one another. That I think was really powerful. That can go a long way to help people, feel a bit more secure. I think also, AI can, for people who maybe aren't using it yet day to day in their work, can feel a little bit alien, but actually showing them how it works in practice and showing them how much control they still have in practice goes a long way to allay some of those fears. I think for a lot of people, it's about rolling your sleeves up and actually practicing with these tools, and that's when it becomes real.
And you mentioned as well that you're based in Berlin and that you're working in Europe. How is the EU AI Act shaping what you can and can't automate in these processes as well?
Yeah, I mean, the EU AI Act, I think where it adds value is that it encourages a proportionate response. This is something that I endorse entirely. As new tech emerges, as new functionality becomes available, what we need are safeguards that are proportionate to the risks of those technologies, right? So if something is high risk, then the responsibility is also high, right? If something is low risk, then maybe less so. That categorization is something that the EUA Act has kind of put to paper, and something that I would welcome. Absolutely, I think it's appropriate. DeepL is born in Germany, has kind of European roots and credentials. Today, we work internationally. The US is a huge growth market for us. We have high premiation in Japan as well, which is a key market for us. But we retain large share of our business in Europe. And I think having a European built kind of success story is also quite reassuring for our customers, right? Because it shows that what is possible, within the EU. And it's not that every tech success story needs to come from Silicon Valley, but actually, there can be really good and promising areas of innovation within the EU as well.
I think it is really important that we see how these acts impact the way that AI is being built and being used in different contexts. I want to change track ever so slightly. I know that previously you've mentioned shadow AI as a concern, and I wonder if you'd be able to speak a little bit to what you mean by that and how organizations should address it, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So employees within a company, and you could apply this to any organization, education would be the same, but let's for a second take a private company. You have employees within that company who are doing their work every day. They might find that they gain access to tools, technology, potentially AI systems that can be really helpful to them in their work. However, those tools might not be centrally managed or approved by their employer. So the company overall has not said this is on the approved list of tools you can use. So to my earlier point, what I would urge against is vilifying that and saying and trying to police that to the nth degree. I think that actually having it centrally managed and making sure that we have kind of compliant and responsible usage is really important. But what I come back to usually is when you look at shadow IT for IT teams, this is a huge opportunity. This is a really good learning opportunity because your employees are telling you very, very clearly what they need and what they want to use. And what we find is, with AI tools, that having them centrally managed can ultimately make life easier for those teams. We'll take the DeepL translator as an example. You might, in a large enterprise, have lots of different teams who are all using DeepL, but maybe in instances that are specific to their individual teams, they're not going to be able to share learnings across teams because they're in their silos, right? They're in data silos. Bringing that together into one centralized contract is great for those teams because suddenly they have access to a wider pool, they can learn from one another, they can learn from their peers, and the central security team, the central IT or operations teams, have governance oversight, right, and have admin control across the business, can track usage, can make sure that they're efficient, can make sure they're compliant. So those admin switches, those governance controls are certainly very important. At the same time, when I see shadow IT in practice, what I actually see is a really good learning opportunity. You might have employees who are, experimenting with new tools. That culture of experimentation is actually can be channeled in the right way, a really positive thing that should be encouraged.
And it speaks a lot to the roles that businesses need to be playing in this AI safety training. Stepping away from shadow AI, the final question I want to ask is what steps do you think we can take to ensure a positive future with AI, please?
When I look ahead, I think that for me, the most kind of burning priority really for companies out there who are grappling with AI right now is upskilling, right? Is training. We did a census and we found that over half of business leaders who were asked genuinely believe that AI will generate more jobs than it removes. So like a net positive impact on employment there. However, it is very clear that those jobs will not be the same jobs. And so we're in this strange interim period right now where access to AI tools has grown much, much faster than the actual education about how to use those tools responsibly. And so we've got this education gap that we're in at the moment. That gap is big, that gap is growing, and it can best be filled with education and training. And I'm not only talking about technical training here, because I mean, just look at the proliferation of kind of low code and no code tools out there. I'm also talking about education on the basics of how do these AI models work? How can we get value from them responsibly and sustainably? For AI companies, the responsibility really, in my view, is to coach and support their customers. I'm really happy to say that DeepL does a very good job of this, is invested in this. And for employers out there, they should really invest in peer learning. I know that in an educational context, take something like learning circles, which Tom, I know that you have written about and feel strongly about. In the context of kind of private companies out there, the same thing holds. This year, DeepL launched its first peer mentorship program, which I think is great. And I think more companies should be investing in that kind of program because a lot of these skills do exist in the workforce, but maybe in silos. And we can stand to gain a lot from learning actually more from one another in a peer to peer context. So pairing that upskilling with responsible AI is really the way, in my view, to future proof your team.
And I think the role of peer-to-peer learning is crucial, both in education, as you mentioned, and the work I've done in learning circles in other contexts, but also, as you say, it's what I hope this podcast ends up being, of lots of different people from different places as part of a big learning circle, being able to share their perspectives and their ideas. Thank you so much, Ed. It's been really amazing to speak to you about DeepL and the work that you're doing there. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do again in future. And yeah, thank you so much for joining. Have a lovely rest of the day. Speak to you very soon.
Thank you, Tom.
Bye-bye.